But look, so I grew up in northern Sydney, a place called Terry Hills, and it was just surrounded by National Park. And growing up in the early 1960s, every summer there were orange glows in the hills at night. There was smoke columns. The bushfire brigade shed was over the road from our place, about 200 metres away, and Dad was deputy captain of the local bushfire brigade. So he'd come home after work and phone would ring, and then he'd have a quick bite to eat and off he'd go. And the old Chevy Blitz fire truck would chug past with about 15 blokes hanging on for grim death. No OH&S in those days. And look, I suppose I was fascinated by it. And it was also the spirit of volunteering. We were on our own. So when we got fires, everybody pitched in and did their bit. And Mum was really active in the community during fires. She'd be over at the Red Cross hut making meals and getting them out to the fireys. My sisters were involved in all sorts of different things, my brother. So it was just what you did. You volunteered and you helped, and I loved it.
Yeah, and what comes out of the book is really a love of the profession. It's amazing you spend a lot of time in the book actually praising your fellow firefighters for what they do, and it's not about the blood and gut stories. It's about the just on the ground helping people. It's really, you must have a strong love of the profession and firefighters in particular.
Look, most firefighters will tell you that fireys are their second family, and what I've found is that's worldwide. I've been overseas and things have gone wrong. You just find a fire station and they go, "Oh, you're one of us. Okay, right, you need to do this, this, this." They just take, and they're just salt of the earth. And look, I'm sure there's a lot of CFA members listening in tonight, and you know what I mean. And so I love them. The guys, the girls, the people in the fire services, whether they're paid or not, SES, they're all cut from the same cloth. Police, ambulance, nurses. They're all just helpers, and they put others first. And I just admire that. And yeah, and I watched. That was Mum and Dad. They were there for other people before. And look, the other thing I didn't say about Dad. Dad taught me about the bush. We were always out in the bush. We just loved it. And Mum started bush regenerating before bush regeneration was a thing.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing. I mean, you were a bush firefighter, weren't you? You were out in the bush when that's how you learned. You learned as a volunteer fire brigade member working in the bush, stopping bushfires. That's what you did.
That's right. Well, from age 12, the book opens with my first big fire in 1971, and just imprinted on my memory. I remember it like it was yesterday, but that was the day I thought, yep, this is what I want to do for a job. This is, I remember Dad saying once, if you love your job, you'll never work a day in your life. And that's how it was. I just, I knew every day that I went to work for those 39 years, I was making a difference. My profession was making a difference out there, and it was just incredibly rewarding. So, and now back as a volunteer, it was interesting during Black Summer. I wasn't in a command role. I was sometimes, but I was mainly dragging hose through the bush, and actually really loved that, being back out there, although it was frightening. Some of the situations, particularly New Year's Eve, 2019 at Bateman's Bay, other places. A couple of times I wondered if I'd go home, and the cruiser would go home, but we did.
You get that from the book too. You get that sense of danger that comes from fighting those big bushfires. You mentioned several times when you were, completely covered in flames, and you were, coming through it's just amazing, just harrowing stories.
Yeah, and look. So what I try to do in Firestorm, the reason I wrote it was there was so much misinformation and disinformation during the fires, and formed the group Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. I'm probably jumping ahead, but former chiefs, and we were ridiculed by politicians and then a certain section of the press. And I thought, but what a lot of those media figures and politicians were saying was so stupid. if you'd read any science whatsoever. And I thought, I really need to put this down. I really need to write this in a way that's compelling, that people will keep turning the pages and put in the science, but not too heavy. It's not, tried not to write it, but
I back that up, Greg. I think it's not a story about, it's not your memoir. It's not a story about, I woke up this morning and I did this. And it's also not a story which is all about the science of climate change. It's a story of a person on the ground, intimately connected to our bush, a person who's passionate about firefighting and passionate about the environment, confronting this reality of climate change and how it's impacting on you and your life. It is a cracking read. It really is.
I'm really glad you say that.
Yeah. And look, the thing that surprised me too about the book, and to go back to what you were saying, is how passionately you are about firefighting. I mean, it's more than a job. You lose a house, or you lose, you'll read in the paper we lost 40 homes or something, and I don't mean to trivialize that. But to firefighters like yourself on the ground, it was a tragedy. You felt you feel every fire.
Look, Darren, I'll admit there are a number of days during that summer, and it's happened to me before, where I went home and found a quiet spot and I cried, because to just let that emotion out. But you feel every loss, because you see a home and and I've been to thousands of house fires, unit fires, other sorts of fires over the years, and every single one, it's the memories people lose. It's the photos that they can't replace of grandma and grandpa and the grandkids, and I think you have to be centered and realise that they're the stakes. The stakes are high, and because you're putting yourself into situations that you might not come out of, and you need to know, well, this is really important. I'm not saying be reckless. You do, have a risk management framework, and when it's gone, and you can't do anything, but you'll push that little extra bit if you possibly can, because you know that the stakes are high for people like me, like, my kids, like my grandkids, like my parents. And so it's just essential. It's people out there who protect us 24/7, plus ambulance, fire, and it's high stakes stuff.
It is. Let's talk about the meat of the book, which is really about the awareness of the growing ferocity of bushfires and their connection to climate change. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And you do go through a lot of issues. I must admit, I'd never heard of a pyro convective cloud before, and you explain how the increasing ferocity of those, the way the fire season has shifted. I mean, tell us about some of the awareness that you have about the growing ferocity of bushfires and how they've impacted on your profession.
Yeah, sure. So look, as a young firefighter, Dad had taught me, look, around Sydney, the Blue Mountains, central New South Wales, eastern central New South Wales, the forested areas, the fire seasons are about 10 years apart. He said, so Blue Mountains burnt 1944, 1957, 68, 77, 94. But so you could pretty well, you knew, and that was because the weather only got really bad about once a decade. You had a really bad summer about once a decade, and you'd have fires in between, and you'd have 1 or 2 days that were pretty bad, but not days after days after days. What in the fire seasons in New South Wales, we didn't lose homes until mid-November ever. Yeah, because it just wasn't hot enough and windy enough and dry enough, and it'd go till about mid-January, and then the fire season would move south to you, down in, to go to the south coast of New South Wales, then into Victoria and Tasmania and South Australia, where you'd cop it in February. So it came from the north, that it's starting Northern Territory in July, Queensland in August. We'd get it starting in October. But that, in a nutshell, that all started to get turned on its head. Now, the 1994 bushfires, I talk about that as the penny drops. Something was different. Something was really odd. And we had the worst fire season in New South Wales history up until then. We lost it was 206 homes. and that was the worst we'd ever had in history. But we'd written off the fire season in November because it rained, and we used to watch these patterns. I explained that, I won't bore you with it, but it rained in late October, early November. It went humid until the fire season passed on. And so this came out of the blue, and I now know we had what we call a flash drought, which is a new phenomena that wasn't recognised for another 6 or 7 years after those fires. In the US, scientists said, look, hydrological droughts are long onset, or it takes a long time, a year or more. But these things, because it's hotter, extreme temperatures and heat waves drive evaporation, and within weeks, you're in effectively a drought, and the fire conditions reflect that all of a sudden. And so I started reading after 94, and we were expecting fire seasons, another 10 years, but no, 3 years later, 97, we were losing homes. 2001, Christmas Eve, we were losing homes. 2002, 2003, Canberra, the worst, exponentially worse than anything they'd ever had. The last time they'd lost homes was 1952, I think, and they lost 487 homes, 4 people killed. They had a fire tornado, one of the first recorded, probably the first ever recorded in the world, 200-kilometre-per-hour winds as 3 big fires joined, and their convection columns reached into the stratosphere and brought very strong winds down to the surface in a downburst. And it just snapped off huge trees like toothpicks and ripped roofs off houses, dumped sparks inside and burnt them down. And and it just got worse. Black Saturday, 2009, we had to change the fire danger index system after that and include code red, catastrophic, because a formerly rare situation where the weather conditions drove the fire danger index off the scale of 1 to 100 had become common. So we just had to recognise that, and we changed the whole firefighting doctrine in Australia from basically encouraging people to stay and defend their homes to no, all bets are off. Once it gets into extreme, and definitely into catastrophic, if you stay, you'll probably die. And that was a hard call for fire services. And look, I've been overseas, and it's happening in California, it's happening in Greece, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Siberia. It's just, and this is just 1.1 degree globally. It's just changed the dynamic of forest fires hugely. And so all this talk about, oh, we'll be right, we'll go for 2.7 degrees. Well, people are saying that will be the end of civilization as we know it. They won't be able to grow.
Well, that's what we saw last summer's tremendous, the bushfire season. It was just amazing, both in New South Wales and here in Gippsland. It was just amazing, and to see that, it's clearly something's going on.
Yeah. So look, and you asked about pyroconvective storms. I say in the book they were the thing of legend to firefighters, and I thought I'd seen one in 1975, but it probably didn't. It was probably just a thunderstorm formed and over a fire. But Dad saw one in 1939 in the January 1939 fires, and described lightning coming out of the smoke, starting new fires, but no rain, and incredible winds. From 1978 to 2018, there were 60 throughout Australia over that period, and that was just 60.
Yeah.
In the one fire season, we had 39. In 6 months, we had 39. So
Yeah.
40 years, we had 60. 6 months, we had 39. And I was under some of the bloody things, and they weren't fun, I can tell you. No. They were scary.
Yeah. And look, I know you're a member of Emergency Leaders for Climate Action, or you were part of that founding of that group, Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. So what are they, and what do they do? What's that?
Yeah, look, so 2018 was a really bad fire season for Tasmania. And, that's another whole other story. Tasmania is a canary in the coal mine. So the World Heritage areas, the alpine areas, the wet rainforests, cold, wet rainforests that have not burnt in millions of years, have never burned, are now burning freely. and lightning storms that used to go across the landscape and do nothing now cause fires. So that was 2018. Queensland lost millions of hectares and had property losses. New South Wales, the fire season started in August. It's supposed to start in October, remember? We were losing homes in the first week of August on the south coast, Bega Valley, and had states of emergency all the way to Newcastle. But it rained. We got those October, November rains in New South Wales. So New South Wales and South Australia were able to provide firefighters to the other states, and we got through it. I started ringing around in early 2019. I'd been fighting fires in the northern tablelands of New South Wales, a couple of deployments, went away for 5 or 6 days at a time, and it was just tinder dry, and the drought had set in. So I started to ring former fire chief colleagues. Every single one of them said, yes, what can we do? We're heading for disaster. It's probably going to be 2019. What can we do? So very quickly, I had 23 former colleagues from every fire service in Australia, urban and rural, a lot of SES, State Emergency Service people who'd seen the change in cyclones, storms, floods, national parks, forestry. We wrote to the Prime Minister in April and May, and that's a whole other story. But
yeah, and I do want to talk about that actually, but I want to bring in somebody who was part of that initial group, and Ewan Waller, who you've mentioned before, a special guest tonight. He's a former Chief Fire Officer, Forest Fire Management Victoria. He's got 40 years experience in land, forest and bushfire management and consulting. Ewan Waller has advised state governments, agencies and companies around Australia on strategic and practical approaches to reducing bushfire risk. He served as Chief Fire Officer for the Department of Sustainability and Environment Victoria from 2005 to 2012. Ewan, welcome to the webinar. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. And hello, Greg. Good to see you again.
Hey, Ewan.
It's something I'm really passionate about and really like. We're at a meeting today, and they're saying the decisions we're making at this point in time, Darren, is going to affect how the lives of our children. And that was from Jim Philpson, a person you well know from around Hayfield.
Yeah, indeed so.
And it is. These are critical decisions of what we're making and the situation we're in now. And Greg's leading. And one of the reasons I joined up is, I just love Greg's passion and energy and drive, because what we're facing is a national problem. It's not a state problem anymore. It's a national problem. And
is this in Gippsland? So the effect of climate change, I mean, Greg's painted the picture of, climate change and its effect on, so we in Gippsland, absolutely, we're part of that.
Oh, for sure. I first noticed it in the Alpine fire in 2003. And it's a really interesting example that I think it was Brian Trail's cattle were killed by a fire that didn't behave normally. Typical of this pyrocumulus type activity, it didn't go with the wind, it went on tangential to the wind and killed cattle where it shouldn't have killed cattle. And people started talking about it, and they were trying to work out what was going on. And then it tweaked with me. This is, the fires are marching across the countryside in a different way because the fuel's hot or dry, everything's available, and the atmospherics are behaving differently. And you can't look back. We're in a really quite a difficult situation.
And there's something came through on the Q&A line about Caligny being a pyroconvective event, and that caused issues there. So thank you for that comment coming through. Greg, you've been overseas as well. So you've noticed that New South Wales, it's clearly present in Gippsland. You mentioned briefly, it's something that's happening all over the world as well. I know that California has been beset with massive bushfires.
Yes, well, look, I first went to California in 1995, and that was part of a Churchill Fellowship, and I went to France and Spain, Canada, and all of them at that time, the penny was still to drop, but Southern Europe had the 1993 fires, and Southern California had the 1993 firestorm, and then we followed 1994, and they're all licking their wounds. But they were talking about how in California, for example, the atmosphere was more unstable. They were saying that this instability is enabling smoke plumes to go higher, and so draw in more oxygen at the base and making more intense fires. And they were scratching their heads at that time. But I've been back over the years and spent quite a bit of time in California and fighting fires there. But I went back in October 2019 for the Kincaid fire in Sonoma County while we were burning. And that was, they were just saying every year now is a bad fire year. In the Sierra Nevada mountains, the fire seasons are 75 days longer than they were 10 years ago, and that's every year. The reduced snowpack means that a pest called western bark beetle that used to die off every winter and let the trees regenerate, because it was reduced snowpack, the beetles kept eating the trees and millions of acres were dying. So you just had these incredible fuel loads as dead branches fell to the forest floor. And they'd tried hazard reduction burning, but they said we're losing it because there's just so much fuel. There's 100 tons per hectare. So that's converted into from 8 tons per acre. But and then their water, they're in constant drought because they're lacking the snow. And so right around the world, just incredible temperatures, incredible fires. And you'd think with all the aircraft we've got, all the technology we have, extra firefighting technologies, humans should be getting the upper hand, but hey, we're losing.
Now, I want to get to some controversial stuff, and Ewan, I know you'll love to answer some of these questions too. You call it myths, okay? There's a section in the book about myths, and I know these. I've heard these myths a bit, so I'd like to get your response to that. Myth 1: greenies stopped hazard reduction burning. Okay. Now, I think Barnaby Joyce said that it was Green's policy and that they were stopping that, and it was all about the fact that we weren't hazard burning enough, and it was all those greenies' fault. So, Greg, what do you reckon?
Look, I don't know how Barnaby let the Greens make his government's policy, but anyway, so the only place in Australia where the Greens are actually in government is ACT in coalition. So, yeah, there'd be local councils, etc. There'd be people who identify as Greens but the regulations around Australia limiting burning, in New South Wales, I know for a fact that there was indiscriminate burning in previous decades, and Liberal national governments and Labor governments just had to regulate it. So progressively it changed, and the weather was changing too. So classic Clarence Valley, what's the other valley up north? Every year, farmers burning off as they have for 100 years, but now they get away in August. They never used to get away in August because it was damp, but we don't get the winter rains anymore. And it has to be regulated, but people don't like that. But the other thing is, there's a great paper just come out from CSIRO, published in Nature last week, saying there's been an 800% increase in the size of fires over the last 32 years, and it is caused by climate change. They've gone through and they've said the winds are stronger and they coincide with higher temperatures, lower humidity. There's been a massive increase in the forest fire danger index Australia-wide, and so the fires are getting bigger. And it says, yes, hazard reduction. Ewan and I have had great discussions about this with his expert knowledge as a forester, and he's taught me a great deal. But we both know on days of extreme fire danger, forget the effects of hazard reduction unless it's in the last 18 months, because fires will actually speed up across those light fuel areas, or they'll just spot straight over the top. Or you'll get a pyroconvective storm that will start a fire 30 kilometres ahead with lightning. So
I'm going to cut you off because I want to hear from Ewan in this then too. So is it the fact that that they're not doing hazard reduction burning? Is that what the problem is?
I'm obviously a big fan of fuel reduction burning. It's the only real tool we've got in the locker. I mean, that you look at the broad areas we've got to burn to stop the fires coming from the Great Divide, like the Alpine fire did, the Great Divide. They all came out of and a lot of the fires in New South Wales and Queensland came out of the parks in the Great Divide. So the only tool we've got is fuel reduction, and it's going to be. I agree with Greg. It's fraught. It's difficult. It's we've got risk-averse governments everywhere you look at it. It's going to be difficult. but it's the only tool we got, and we've just got to work the fuels. And I believe if we get the area done, it stops the run of the big fires. I mean, it's all slows, it takes the energy out of the runs of big fires. So I'm a big fan of fuel reduction, but reality is, this is the X factor, or the pulls it down. The reality is, it's not going. I don't believe it's going to happen. There's just too many things working against it. I could go through them, Darren, but for the sake of today, I won't. But there's smoke, there's biodiversity, there's everybody. The big one, everybody's got an opinion about it, and you get 10 people in the room, you got 20 different opinions. That's just it just stalls. Things just stall, and it just doesn't happen. So that's the reality.
I know, Greg, you talk about fuel reduction, but you talk about back burning as a way of stopping fires all through the book, but you also talk about smaller communities protecting themselves by doing hazard reduction burning around smaller communities. I think that's towards the end of the book. Would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, look, and that's where the research is going. It's saying, look, and it might sound like Ewan and I aren't on the same page. We actually are, and he's been a great advocate of light burning, for example, and I'm a great advocate for traditional Indigenous burning practices, but the simple facts are it can't be done at scale because we drove them off their land and they're no longer on the country that, in a lot of places in Australia that need to be treated. But, there's a whole lot of stuff, and governments like New South Wales, where the Nationals, so I'll call it out, are saying, the national parks aren't burning enough. They're the ones who reduced the size of the National Park Service and also transferred state forests to national parks without extra staff. So how they meant to do it. And these are the frustrations that, Ewan has brought forward, and other people in the forestry are. We're losing skilled people in the forests who understand who can do this work. And I've gone off track a bit there, but
no. I want you to go off track. I love off track.
Yeah,
okay.
Look, it's I'm redoing a hazard reduction strategy for the northern beaches of Sydney, as in my volunteer role as a group captain, helping the local RFS paid staff. But we can't burn because we're in La Nina and it's too wet. And so it's either too wet, because part of climate change is for every degree increase in temperature, there's 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. It's more energetic. So the rain we get now is in short, sharp downpours that just drenches everything. And then you get heat waves that dry it out and you go and light it and the fire gets away. So we're, this bizarre situation about how long ago, 7 weeks ago, couldn't get a burn to light on the Saturday. On the Sunday, we lit it, and on the Monday, it got away and burned an extra 200 hectares and crowned and spotted and just behaved for 2 days like a wildfire, and then it rained, and then we couldn't do any more burning. So the windows for burning are reducing, and Ewan's 100% correct. The only real weapon we have in the locker against these massive fires is burning and modifying the fuels. And as I said, the Bushfire Research Hub from Wollongong Uni are saying around communities, we might have to permanently modify some of the fuels and burn ridge tops, things like that, to take the sting out of fires.
Well, I'm glad you. I might talk about alpine. I'm looking for it here. I can't find it. But grazing reduces blazing. I've heard that a few times here in Gippsland. I'll go with you, Ewan. Grazing, that would reduce blazing. I read that on a sign somewhere. What do you reckon about that?
I'll probably get lynched in the Dargo pub, but I don't believe it's really a tool we can use. It has some effect, but it's minimal. And one of the studies I saw, trampling by the cattle did more than the grazing actually did. So I just don't think it's a factor. It may be in the lowlands, in the foothills, but there's not much feed there anyway. So it's not. No, I don't. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a tool we can use. Interesting overseas and whatever they. Southern France and all that type of thing, yes, for sure. In the scrubland and whatever with goats and whatever, we have grazing opportunities elsewhere in the world, but Australia, it just doesn't work. Yeah. Victoria, I should say.
That's very, very good of you. You're well done. Greg, what do you say to that? Well, I kind of know the answer because it's in the book, but what do you say?
I'm not allowed to say a word in front, am I, when I'm talking about cattle with something else? It's look, there was an Alpine task force in Victoria in 2005, and it went into the science of this, and it found that, guess what, cattle eat green shoots and grass, etc., and low-lying live shrubs. They don't eat eucalypt leaves, they don't eat twigs, they don't eat dry native grasses and shrub, and that's what bushfire fuel is. So they actually just do a lot of ecological damage to habitat for native animals, and probably ruin a lot of waterways, but they make no appreciable difference to bushfire risk, and they eat the wrong stuff. So it sounds great, and look, the whole thing with climate change is people want simplistic single solutions, but it's way too complex for that. There's, we've got to look at building standards, fire bunkers, modified fuel zones, community refuges. That there's so much satellite imagery, fast attack aircraft. There's so much that needs to be done, and there's none of these single approaches on their own will do anything now, and people can't get their head around that. But there's some like this one that are just a furphy.
Is that you found that? Is that true that it's a difficult issue to face, the bushfire crisis, if we call it that?
Oh, spot on. It's incredibly complex. It's one of those wicked problems. There's no straightforward, simple answer, and yet people are rattling, in the pub or wherever it may be, just saying, "Oh, you just got to do more burning. That'll fix everything." No, it's not. It's reality. Reality's moved on, and a lot of people are still looking back, and like grazing, they're looking back to say, "Oh, that's the way to go." We've got to look the whole, as Greg's saying, the ball game's changed. With the since 2003, as far as I'm concerned, the ball game's changed dramatically.
Yeah. Now, I should say for people who are thinking about buying the book, look, it's actually fair politically. I think it's extremely fair. I mean, it's not anti-coalition policy or whatever. You've mentioned Tony Abbott there within your talk, and you're quite kind to Tony and have him show great respect to Tony as a fellow firefighter. And you have some incredible praise for Gladys Berejiklian and how she handled particularly the evacuation of towns along the coast during the New South Wales fire crisis. And you're very kind to her, but and rightly so, I think, in reading the book. But you do mention, and I know that you did speak to the government in 2019 about the crisis, about what needs to be done, and I know you were incredibly frustrated by the reception that you got, and you detail that in the book. So do you want to talk a little bit about trying to go to the federal government and explain what's going on?
Yeah, look, I thought we were dismissed as activists because through just the way things were, the warnings that we sounded came before a national election. So I think the Prime Minister just said, these people are trying to embarrass us, and so that's it. And he scrubbed us. Scott Morrison scrubbed us and wouldn't reply to a lot of correspondence, replied some months later to our April and May correspondence. And it was September when we finally were contacted by Angus Taylor, because questions were raised in Parliament and in the media saying, why won't you meet with these former fire chiefs? And it was just after the north coast of New South Wales and southern Queensland were devastated on the 5th, 6th and 7th of September, the earliest ever catastrophic fire weather and many, many homes were lost, lives were lost. And so why aren't you listening to these fire chiefs? Now, Ewan knows because he was there. 4 former fire chiefs, so Ewan from Victoria, me, Lee Johnson from Queensland, Mike Brown from Tasmania. We went to Parliament House on, I think it was the 4th of December. It was the first week of December, to meet with Minister Taylor. Minister Littleproud. We told him that Minister Taylor was coming, and he said, no, he's not. We said, yes, he is, because the ABC told us. But anyway, so we'd asked the Prime Minister to help us coordinate a meeting, and he refused. But cut a long story short, it was way too late, and they nodded and they nodded. And while we were still in the building, they had a press conference saying, guess what? We met with the fire chiefs, and we assured them that the current fire chiefs are doing a great job, and they can just go and retire and sit in their rocking chairs with a blankie. And we really don't need your advice. Off you go. We've met you, and that's the reality of it. And in the meantime, in between that, Michael McCormack, the Deputy Prime Minister, called us time wasters and lumped us in with inner city latte sipping, blah, blah, blah. The Deputy Premier in New South Wales, forget what he called us, a bunch of bastards or something. It was lovely stuff. And it, and it's sticks and stones. You're talking to people who fight fires and dodge falling trees and pyroconvective storms, but it was just juvenile. And you just think, what's happened to our political process? And through this, the Prime Minister shifted. No, it's not a factor. It's got nothing to do. Climate change has nothing to do with fires.
Well, they said it was arsonists. They said it was arsonists first, didn't they?
Yeah, so that was rubbish. So Victoria Police, New South Wales Police, they said the lowest figures they'd had for years for arson. And out of thousands and thousands of fires, the number is in the book. I won't say a number. It was I think it might have been 11 were actual arson, but only one of those actually got out of control. So it was just whatever they could throw at it to deflect away from the fact this was a weather-driven event. It was the hottest, driest year ever. There'd never been fire weather like it on the planet, and it went for 6 months. It went through winter, spring, and summer. It wasn't a summer event. And we lost more homes. New South Wales, most homes we'd ever lost in the past was 2013 in October, which was a weather climate change driven event, but that's another story. We lost 2,476, 11 times more homes than ever before. Hundreds in Gippsland, over 300, Ewan, I think. South Australia, and every state and territory was burning at the same time, so we couldn't share firefighting resources. And through part of it, California was burning and wouldn't release some of the aircraft. So this is the new, it's not the new normal, it's the new extreme, but the extremes are getting closer together.
So you, from you, are you getting frustrated by that message as well? Are you finding support for fire services? It's difficult to get that support?
I think it's swinging around in Victoria. There's been some great work done within the within the government environment department in getting more support. And the chief officer, Chris Harbin, has done some great work in getting new money and more people on the ground. 154 extra people on the ground, which is really great support. But as I say to Chris every time I meet him, said that the people are looking for the evidence. They're looking for smoke in the air. They're looking for real things getting done, and they are. The fire breaks and roads and that are picking up. The burning program is going to pick up. So, but we've got a massive task in front of us. I mean, we've got to burn these fire scars of 1 million hectares or more. We've got to start going back and trying to control the regrowth that's coming through like a wheat crop. So a lot of work to do, but we are making headway at a state level. But I hope nationally we're making headway as well. That really worries me that, that there's still inertia there, I believe, that they didn't pick up. It's a national problem we've got. And I just had another little thing
sure.
about the mountain cattlemen. What really upset me with the mountain cattlemen, the whole when they were thrown off the high plains and whatever, was the disrespect was shown within government, and the smugness of the people that won that argument was really, really unfair, and they lost years, centuries of knowledge about how the high country did work. And we paid the price. We really have paid the price, and it really, really annoyed me that how the mountain cattlemen were treated, really unnecessarily, and that's just a real injustice.
And thank you for saying that. That is a really important point, Ewan. Can I just go through some of the questions? I've been asking people questions and then I've been ignoring them, so I think I should actually ask some. I've got a response here. They said, were peat fires a thing before this century? We seem to have had quite a few in recent years that may burn for years. So questions about peat fires. Do either of you two know anything about peat fires?
Yeah, look, and I'm sure Ewan will too, but so the New South Wales fires, the first fire was, was Port Macquarie. And as you come off the highway into Port Macquarie, turn east, there's a big area it used to be marsh. It was just freshwater marshland. It's dried out and now it's burning. So all that vegetative matter. So it burnt underground until February when it poured with rain and flooded. There was no way to put it out. And every time there was a hot day, it would pop up, set the scrub on top of the light, and the fires would just take off again. So that where I live, Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, there's near West Head, there's an area of swampy land. It was always swamp when I was a kid, even in summer. It's now dried out. We had fires there. We had to set up sprinkler systems over 20 hectares just to keep, because it just kept popping up and fires setting off. So it's a drying out of the landscape is leading to these underground fires that we're just not used to. There are other places where there were peat fires, Hunter Valley, although a lot of that's been mined now. So, and I don't know, Ewan, I'm sure, would have something on that.
Yeah, similar, exactly the same reason they're drying out and catching the Western District a few years ago, or probably 5 years ago now, had terrible trouble. They just went on and on and on, and even at Cape Conran this year with the after the Black Summer fires, there was fires. And they're really nasty, Darren, because they're hard to put out, but they're also dangerous. You break through in them. They really are a dangerous element of firefighting.
Another question here. Fires change vegetation and climate change is limiting the window for hazard reduction burning. So fires change vegetation and climate change is limiting the window for hazard reduction burning. What are the options to deal with all this? So talking again about hazard reduction burning in our current climate and how we can deal with that. Greg, have you got any simple answers to a complex problem there?
No, not really, but great question. And look, one of the debates, I suppose, it's discussions. If those of you who've got Amazon Prime, look up Burning. It's a new documentary by Eva Orner, who's based in Minute, but that's not why I'm telling you. But Tim Flannery explains in there how when the first fleet arrived, Sydney was like open woodland, grasslands, and they could see for miles. And they said it was just beautiful country. Now it's thick scrub. And as he said, we took the fire stick out of the hands of the people who'd managed it for 60,000 years. And the 1939 Royal Commission, Stretton Royal Commission in Victoria, it talks about how pushing out Indigenous owners changed the landscape. You used to be able to ride a horse, through the Victorian countryside, but now it's full of scrub. And that was 1939. So we've modified the landscape. And I know one of the things we're working on here is very hard in Sydney sandstone country not to have intense fire because of the ladder fuels, they call it, grass, scrub, treetop. But every time you burn hard, it advantages the fuels that grow back that burn hard. So if you can get some light burning in, you change the mix. And I actually saw there was a question there about the research of Dr. Phil Zylstra, and I do know of that, but not a great deal. But his thing is, basically, as I understand it, if you leave forests for decades, they become less flammable. But the problem with climate change, as we saw, and with the CSIRO report, 800% bigger, the fires, you're not going to find forests that'll be fire-free for 30 years anymore. Even the wet forests that never used to burn.
Ewan, have you got any commentary on that and how we deal with hazard reduction burning in the current climate?
Yeah, and just going on that last point about that Greg raised, is we can't guarantee that we can keep fire out of it. Back in 2006, 2006, half the Grampians burnt, and people said, therefore we can't burn the rest of the Grampians. We've got to protect that from not burn, because we need it as a refuge. The answer was the opposite. We need to burn it lightly and properly to try and get some protection for what the Grampians is an island. Anyway, the forest structure of the forest, as Greg's saying, is changed completely. It's gone from an open woodland to a thicket, and we're really struggling to work out how we are. The authorities are, how they're going to burn that. I mean, how they're going to manage that. I mean, and we've got millions of hectares of it. It's not just as if there's patch here and there, but there's millions of hectares of wattle, scrub. And we had a good example in the Seaton fire in a few years ago. Darren, you may remember it. And they predicted it was going to come out, a number of hours after daylight. It ran through there like a wheat crop and got into Seaton within hours of starting in Cooper's Creek. And that's the type of situation we've got. The scrub wilts because the canopy's gone, and all the sun, the hotter sun comes down, and you got this wheat crop, 2 metre high laddered fuels, and it's just barrels of fire. And there we are again. We destroyed the thing we're trying to protect. We virtually can't protect conservation values, and we can't respect environmental services at the moment, and we've got a hell of a job in front of us.
Indeed, we have. There was a question about this year's fire season. Right now we've got floods in Gippsland, or we have had. What are your feelings about that? Do we expect a dangerous fire season this season? What are we looking for?
Look, nothing like 2019-20. So that the moisture profile is just totally different. We've had a couple of years of, this second year of La Nina. I won't go into all that. You can look that up if a lot of you would know what it is, but it means more rain. In New South Wales, the catchments are quite flooded, so any more rain will cause floods. Western districts, it's looking to me a bit like 1973, 74, where we had same sort of weather patterns, a lot of rain. The centre of Australia greened up, went from red to green. And then in 1975, it dried out and got hot, and 117 million hectares burnt from Penrith to Perth to Darwin down to Adelaide. So it just burnt for months, and there were different types of fires. There wasn't much wind. There were no property losses that I know of, other than some fencing, or a lot of fencing. I don't think there much in the way of stock losses, but they just burnt and burnt until it rained. And I'm worried that Western New South Wales, because I know that best southwestern Western Australia is looking a bit problematic too, according to AFAC, Council for Fire and Emergency Services. But you've got long grass, and all we need is some heat waves. And as anyone who lives on the land knows, even if it's wet underneath, if it's dry on top and it blows, you'll get very fast-moving grass fires. So I think that'll be the feature this year and next year. That fuel, if it doesn't burn before it gets dry again and blows away.
What about you, Ewan? What do you think about Gippsland? What are your thoughts about this year's fire season?
I very similar to what Greg's saying. I think we're pretty all right. But you say that, and then, as we all know, we get a week of hot, windy weather in Gippsland. And that long grass dries off. It's gone to seed now, and so it's ready to go. I mean, and then we've got a grass fire problem, but the whole soil's profile saturated now, which is fantastic, and the dams are full. Things we haven't seen for ages. So I think it's going to be a mild season, but you never say never. It could be in February, hot, windy days, and we're all hanging around, sitting on the edge of our seat again. So you can never tell. I just really hope not. I'm sick of hot seasons.
Yeah, Ewan, I'll stick with you. We've gone through a bit, and I know there's some more questions I could do. There's a bunch of stuff on fire hazard reduction burnings, which I think we've covered enough of right now. You read the book, Ewan? What do you reckon? Yep.
It's a really good read. I believe if you got to have an open mind. A lot of people, that. It's like the vaccination question. People will say just be contrary for the sake of being contrary, and turn their, saying they don't believe this and don't believe in that. It's just to me, if you've got an open mind, it's a really, really good read, and it brings together all those factors that we're experiencing over the last couple of decades, and gives you a really clear picture of. And because it's so personal, it is. I felt the pain. I felt Greg's pain, and felt the pain of the people that Greg bumped into and worked with and whatever. And it's a great Australian story, and I love firefighters telling their stories. It's so powerful, always so powerful.
And you, Greg, how's the book going? How are you going with it? How are you feeling now that you've launched the book?
It's an interesting thing, Darren. I don't know. I can't answer that. The publisher haven't told me how it's selling. I don't know if it's popular. It's had good reviews, and thanks, Ewan. That was really kind of you to say that. And I actually had a firefighting audience in mind as a primary audience, because I met so many firefighters at so many fires across the state during that summer saying, you're the climate guy, what's going on? We've never seen this before. And I'd explain it to them. And they said to me, you need to write a book. My mates in such and such a brigade think it's all crap and they need to read about this. So it's fire stories and explaining my journey and how I saw it change. And I bring the science in, and it's heavily referenced because I knew I'd be attacked, because I was attacked during the fires for daring to say that, hey, this might be different and we've never had anything like this before. So I've made sure that I can back up what I say.
And it is heavily referenced. It's a really great read. Look, just to finish off, because I've been handed a question here. In the time of shrinking governments and less volunteers and increasing fire events, it all sounds a very difficult problem. So how are we going to fill the gap? How are we going to solve the problem? I mean, how are we going to, climate change is obviously upon us. You mentioned before the government's arguing about this 2.7 or whatever. We're currently increasing and already we're a little bit out of control. Greg, what's the solution to the problem right now?
Look, I actually don't believe there's a solution right now because it's become so bad. But Ewan said before about forest fire management in Victoria, and the Victorian government, I have to say, is leading the way nationally with resources for fire agencies. And I think, Ewan, there were 600 seasonal firefighters put on recently, in addition to the 150 odd extra full-time equivalent positions. And, I know there's been reforms with Fire Rescue Victoria and CFA, and I won't comment on that, but there's been additional resources there. So that's great. If we get another black summer, it will be worse, the next one, because the weather is just getting hotter and hotter. And I think we've passed a tipping point. No firefighting agency or arrangements on this planet are capable of dealing with the fires we get. So California proved that. They can throw the resources they have are incredible, but the Kincaid fire in Sonoma County, when they had 137 km/h winds, they just evacuated 70 miles to the coast because that's where it was going, and no human effort on earth was going to stop that fire in its tracks. So what have we got to do? We've got to turn the heat down. So the Royal Commission said very clearly, because of emissions already in the system, it will continue to heat till 2050, till mid-century, no matter what we do about emissions now. So, the Barnaby Joyces of the world, sorry for naming our deputy, he'd go, see, it makes no difference. No, they then went on to say, what happens after that relies entirely on what we do about emissions today. If we drive them down rapidly and make net zero, we have a chance of stabilising the temperature mid-century, and then eventually it might start to go down if we actually draw carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But our government wouldn't commit to anything. They committed to a target without a plan based on technologies that might be invented one day. But I've got a mobile phone, and look, we didn't have this 10 years ago. So, and I don't want to be disparaging about politicians, but they're supposed to lead, and they're not leading. They're dragging their tails, and my grandkids are going to reap the rewards of that. And I'm not very happy. There's an election coming up, and I'll be open. I'm throwing my weight behind an independent candidate because I don't like party politics anymore. I don't think we get anywhere. But our planet is too precious to leave it in the hands of the people who went to COP26 with nothing. A pamphlet. They had a pamphlet and a slogan. That was it. How embarrassing.
Ewan, what about you? Have you got a solution? As I said, harder to get volunteers, hard to get resources. What are we going to do?
I agree with what Greg's saying, but the really heavily investing in prevention. I think when you've got problems, you go straight to prevention. That's the first rule. Instead of going to the other end response, you got to go to prevention, and then preparedness, getting on top of fires quickly when they're small, and really pouring your resources in. I think the Black Summer fires cost $100 billion overall. Just putting $1 billion of that into prevention would make a heck of a lot of difference. So that's where I'm looking at. You can get away with some substitution, I think, and I really supported the aircraft and things like that when we haven't got the resources or the scene's changed, and it has changed with OH&S and a lot of welfare work and whatever. It's not the same as, you can't look back. It wasn't the same as when I first started as a young forester. Technology, smart work, and even working with the communities, more work with the community. There's some things we can do, but it's playing catch up, and it's not answering the big question. And the big question is we've got to get on top of the climate, I believe. And I wholly agree with what Greg's saying, that we haven't seen the worst of it yet, and we've got a heck of a job. And I really worry about what our children are going to invest, or what we're leaving for our children and our grandchildren. It's a real worry.
And I think we've lost Darren. So maybe that's.
I think we have.
Yeah. So I think the time's up. So there you go.
He must have evaporated.
Yeah.
I believe we're still recording. I'm sorry, I wasn't jump in.
Hi, Esther.
I can. Hi guys, sorry, I'm Esther. I'm on the GCCN board. I'm the manager for the Smart Specialisation project that we run with the Latrobe Valley Authority. Was there anything else that you guys had pressing that you wanted to air? Anything you would like to have a message maybe for the audiences?
Look, just that this is about the future. It's actually not about the future, because it's here and now. I think Black Summer was a wake-up call to everybody that the effects of climate change that were predicted all those years ago, they've come to pass earlier than people thought. Emissions are still going up. We're still cutting down forests. So it doesn't make any sense. We need urgent government action on emissions, and Australia needs to join the rest of the world and bring that temperature down, because that's in the long term. And I agree wholeheartedly. Ewan's, I get a bit passionate, but Ewan talking about prevention, that's where, and I talk about building standards, all sorts of things that need to go into safer communities, but educating communities, mobilising communities, and listening to people like our Indigenous brothers and sisters who've got a lot to teach us. That's all vitally important. But and look, I just want to thank everyone for listening to me waffle on about my book tonight. And so that's all I had to say.
No, thank you very much, Greg. It's been great. I haven't managed to get into your book yet, but I do have a copy. So I will hopefully get into it. And I've heard wonderful things, from Darren, but also just listening to you speak tonight. I'm extra looking forward to it. Ewan, was there anything else that you felt that you had the burning questions, burning lust?
No, I support what Greg's saying. We've got a lot of work to do. Gippsland, I really appreciate Gippsland, you're putting this on. I mean, that Gippsland's really suffered badly since 2003 from fires. We've been bashed. I think we've had 3 million hectare fires that have ended up in in amongst us, and a lot of people have been hurt, and a lot of country burnt and whatever. So we've just got to keep talking, working, and really applying ourselves to it, and in the big picture, getting the climate back to where it should, which is going to take a long time, but we're on the way, and Greg and I are giving it our best shot, aren't we, Greg?
Absolutely, yeah. It's been great working with you, Ewan. So
great, mate.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, guys. It has been a wonderful evening. These evenings really are about who we come along to speak. So thank you so much for being part of this.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
No worries.
See you. Bye.
See ya.